Okay, it's officially 8:30 p.m. Let's start grabbing our seats. My name's Ron. I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group. We got a little special guest tonight, which we do every week. Don't miss it. If you get here, please come early. You know, I always like to talk about our hot sausages and our ham sliders and cronuts and the world. What is it? The second best hot dogs in the United States. Don't ask which one the first one. That's all we have. But anyway, we got the world's best chairperson. So let's welcome Brian and get him.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brian, and I am an alcoholic. This is a one-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday right here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, 301 North Main Street in Doylestown, PA. The food and the fellowship for this group starts at 8 o'clock, and the speaker comes on at 8:30. We have a business meeting for this group that meets every Saturday, 7 p.m. to 7:30. Please come early and join us. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teachings of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others can benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. Is there anyone here from out of town or here for the first time that would like to introduce themselves on a first name basis so we can welcome you? Yeah.
Hi, Scott, alcoholic.
Scott.
From Palmerton, Pennsylvania.
Welcome.
I'm Keith, I'm an alcoholic.
Keith. Yeah. Diane, welcome. Cindy, welcome.
Alex, alcoholic, Satan.
Alex, welcome.
I'm James, an alcoholic.
James, welcome. In the back there.
I'm Scott, an alcoholic.
Scott,
My name's Bob, and I'm an alcoholic.
welcome.
Hi, Dave, I'm an alcoholic.
Dave, welcome. We get everybody in the back there. Colleen, welcome. We get everybody? All right, nice. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with a working knowledge of the 12 steps and that is willing to sponsor raise their hands? So if you're new, you can look around the room, grab one of those people after the meeting. We'll have a bunch of home group members hanging around. So if you're out there and if you're new or if you're struggling or if you've been coming around for a while and it's just not working, hang out with us after the meeting, grab somebody. We'll all be hanging here. Are there any announcements from the floor for the good of AA? Nothing from the floor. A couple quick announcements from this group. This group has a sister group, which is a big book study group. It meets right up the road here at Salem UCC Church every Thursday at 7:30. The coffee is on at 6:15. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purchase of big books and CDs to help those who can't afford them can put their donations in the jar on the back table marked Big Book and CD donations. All CDs are available free of charge. And with the contributions from this group, we've been able to provide a lot of big books going into treatment centers and institutions, so we appreciate your contributions. This group has a YouTube channel, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. We post speakers from this group, also speakers from our Monday night meeting, which is at 6 o'clock right in the room here. You can find speakers there. You can join our Facebook page. We also have a Facebook page, which a lot of people that we post for this group, happenings for this group, happenings all around AA. Other groups post their events that they might be having. So good resource to have to stay tied in with happenings in AA really all throughout the area. And with that, I believe Andrew's going to come up here. He's going to read our Just for Today.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew, and I am an alcoholic. Just for today, prayer of recovery. Just for today, I will be agreeable. I will look as well as I can, dress becomingly, talk low, act courteously, criticize not one bit, not find fault with anything, and not try to improve or regulate anybody except myself. Now I will introduce Kara to say the preamble.
Hello everybody, my name is Kara, I'm an alcoholic. Today I'll read the preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not filled with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help another alcoholic. Now I'd like to ask Jay to come up here and read the 12 steps.
My name is Jay and I'm an alcoholic. Great to see everybody. AA 12 Steps of Recovery. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Okay, we got a 7 tradition. Every A group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, we'll just make sure the basket makes its way around. There's no dues or fees for AA membership, but we do have expenses. This group provides many services. Your contributions help us to cover the cost of rent, big books, CDs, workshops. We also have hoodies for sale. If you want to contribute to the group, you can see someone after the meeting if you're interested in purchasing a hoodie. There's absolutely no smoking on the church property. It's the church's policy, not ours. So, just be considerate of that as you're coming and going from the meeting. Just wait till you leave the premise. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. And now to introduce our speaker for tonight, a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group, on loan to us from the There Is More to Life group of Mechanicsburg, PA. Please help me welcome Brian.
So I'm going to take off this lid because otherwise there is a 100% chance I will need a drink in the middle of it and I will end up knocking it on the floor. So, hi everybody, I'm an alcoholic and my name is Brian. It's good to be here sober tonight. My sobriety date is June 27th of 1984. I am a member of the There's More to Life group, which is located in scenic Mechanicsburg, think Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I have a sponsor a bunch of people and have for a long time, and many of them sponsor people who sponsor people, and I've had that life-transforming experience that Alcoholics Anonymous offers to alcoholics through the practice of the 12 steps, what in a shorthand we call a spiritual awakening. And so what I'll try to do tonight is to share my experience, strength, and hope, what I was like, what happened, what I'm like now, and how I developed a relationship with a power greater than myself sufficient to relieve me of my alcoholism. I think those are the standards the big book lays out. I say that because I will fall woefully short of that, but at least we know what I'm shooting for, and so we can, and then we can work backward from there. I tend to start all over the place, honestly. I know some people are really good at kind of a linear story, like, I was born in Poughkeepsie, or and then this happened. It's just not how I think. So I'll start here tonight, because it popped back into my head as I was driving here. When first 10 years I was sober, for a mix of educational reasons and work opportunities, I moved a whole bunch of times. And I'd gotten sober in Pittsburgh, I'd moved away, and right at my 5th anniversary, right around that time, I moved back to Pittsburgh for a job. And I thought, I'm going to go back to my first home group, because it would be such a treat for them to have me back, sort of star pupil returns. And so I went to the meeting, and this woman, Helen, who was at my very first AA meeting, and who was with me, she was more regular than I was, but every meeting I went to, she was there in the first year. I can't say that every meeting she went to, I was there. I was meeting resistant for a bit. But she came up to me, and she said, "It is so good to see you," which is, sort of what I was expecting. And then she said, "We never thought you'd get sober." I don't know, which is kind of a shocker when somebody tells you that, but, and then she said, "You were so angry." And I, of course, thought that I had, hidden that very well, and that no one in Alcoholics Anonymous could have ever detected that about me. Of course, what it brought right to the forefront is that the great gift in AA is we don't have to hide anything. And even if we think we're doing it, we're unsuccessful. So if someone's sitting here tonight who feels he or she has to hide something, we don't want to talk about anger, we don't want to talk about rage, something we don't talk about enough in Alcoholics Anonymous, honestly. Everybody's seeing it anyway. So you might as well join the crowd of people talking about it. But I wasn't shooting to end up in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's tons of alcoholism in my family, and so if you were making a guess about what might happen to me, the idea that I might end up in Alcoholics Anonymous was not, like, oh my God, that could never happen. The idea that I would play professional football, you'd say that could never happen out of this gene pool. But you might have alcoholism, no surprise. I had alcoholism I have it, but in one, there are lots of things that are the same about alcoholism, and the one thing that seems to be different for whatever reason, I don't pretend to understand it, is the rate at which alcoholism progresses. There are some people, and I've known them, they hang on for years before things go off the cliff. I basically started leaning over the cliff. I just didn't know it. And when I took my first drink, and I was in free fall really, really quickly. For whatever reason, I went from someone who had never been drunk, never had probably 2 drinks in a row, to a daily drinker within a matter of months. The only thing that slowed me down was my ability to do it. I would drink myself so sick at first on one weekend night that I couldn't drink for days. And then I could do it 2 weekend nights. And then Thursday moved onto the calendar. And it just started, but when I'm in it, I don't see that. And in fact, part of what's happening to me when I was drinking is all of the stuff that's going on that I should be saying, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with this. I'm actually patting myself on the back for dealing with it. So I start drinking, I get the spins. I know that I put my like half out of the bed with one foot on the ground, and that's going to stop it. Now, I shouldn't drink. It doesn't stop it, by the way, but I told myself it did as I was lying there feeling horrendous with it. I would drink myself so sick. I would drink myself into the dry heaves. I would be in a bathroom and I would turn the faucet on so I could be like just drinking it down, throwing it up, drinking it down, throwing it up, because now I've cured the dry heaves. Anything to keep drinking. And I didn't know it. I don't like Diet Coke. It has never once occurred to me that if I could just slam down 6 of them, the 7th one will probably be tolerable. But you know, I mean, that's exactly. I never really liked the taste of alcohol. I mean, we were drinking Knickerbocker beer, $23.50 for a half barrel. You know, we were only going like top shelf there. But I don't think Knickerbocker survived. But that's, you know, but just slamming it down. You know, pouring vodka in it and slamming it down. Because of the way I drank. You know, stuff starts to happen when you're drinking all night. You can't function during the day, and much of the world, other than those folks who work third shift often, much of the world is designed during the day, the world I was in was a daytime world, except I couldn't function there. I started getting in a lot of trouble really quickly. There was we talk about the dean's list. There's the academic dean's list. That's what people are talking about, people who are doing well in school. There's also the disciplinary dean's list. I didn't know the academic dean. The disciplinary guy knew exactly who I was, where I lived, and what I had last done. I was on that dean's list, and because I was in college at the time, and a friend of mine ended up going to this disciplinary dean to say that she said she thought I was drinking myself to death. Hearing that should have set off an alarm bell for me, but I was sort of ticked off at her for going behind my back. She couldn't have said it to me. Well, no, because she functioned during the day. So I was like a vampire. You couldn't find me during the day. But so I go. This guy calls me in. I go to the meeting with him, and he says, what he said was, you know, your friend's doing this, she's there, your friend told me this, blah, blah. I'm not telling you what you have to do, but I've made an appointment with the drug and alcohol counselor for you this afternoon. So if you want to take advantage of that, you should go do that. That's what he said. What I heard was, Brian, can you do a favor for me? If you go see this drug and alcohol counselor, it'd be a huge help to me, and I'll owe you one. Now, he didn't say that, he didn't think that, but my ability to process actual data was getting pretty bad. So I thought I'll go to this drug and alcohol counselor and to, you know, help him out, and he'll owe me one. So I went to a drug and alcohol counselor the way alcoholics who don't want to get sober go to counselors. You know, you go high, you go except when you can't make it. You tell them everything but the truth. And then you come into Alcoholics Anonymous. These therapists don't know what they're doing. Of course they don't know what they're doing, because we haven't given them anything to work with. But that's what I did. So drug and alcohol counseling had no impact on me, because I didn't want it to have an impact on me. I wanted it to have an impact on the impact my drinking was having. I didn't want to not drink. I didn't want Alcoholics Anonymous. I wanted Consequences Anonymous. I wanted everything to stop except for me. And that there might be a world where that exists, but the real world in which we live, that's not one of the options. But again, I was half in this world and half in another one, so I was working, not that it might happen. Right up there with somebody coming in and saying, oh my God, we've been looking for you since birth. Switched in the hospital, you're actually a prince, and we're going to take you. That's why you feel ill at ease in your family all the time, because you don't belong to them. You belong with us. Or, if I can't get that, second level, you are just what we've been looking for. You have this unbelievable skill set that no one has found yet, but we see it in you. We're going to pay you a ton of money for very little effort. Thank God we found you on that bar stool. And those things, that's my plan. That's how. No surprise, things are I'm like totally in free fall, so things are getting much worse. I'm doing a bunch of drugs at the same time. I mean, that's accelerating everything. But I drink the way a hippo eats. I mean, it's like, I cannot get enough alcohol into my system. When people say things like, you drink too much, that doesn't resonate, really, because it feels like I can't drink enough. That I need a second throat to be able to just get it down. And then I'm back in a bunch of trouble again. And I get this gift, which is, oh my gosh, I think this trouble I am in, all of which revolves around the fact that I can't do anything during the day because I'm drunk and unable to get up, I think this has something to do with my drinking. And so I go back to the dean again, and I tell him that, and I mean it. See, I think there's some relationship between my drinking and these problems. When alcoholics say that, of course, it just becomes unanimous because everybody else already knew it, but I it finally caught up with everybody else. And he said, basically, I will pull you out of the trouble you're in. We'll violate every disciplinary rule. I will get you out of the trouble you're in, and you have to do several things, one of which was go to rehab. I didn't know what rehab was. Maybe I'd heard of Betty Ford Center at that time, but it wasn't something on my radar screen. But I have alcoholism, and if you say to me, you're in trouble, I will get you out of that now if you do something in the future, I'm all in. Yes, I will take out of trouble now, and I'll worry about the future when it comes. So this is a Friday, and I'm going to rehab. And then Saturday, and I'm going to rehab. And then Sunday, it's a little fuzzier. By Monday, I'm kind of head scratching because people go to rehab when they're in trouble. I'm not in trouble. So I lie. I just make up stories about why I can't go to rehab. Totally, I don't have insurance. I didn't even know if I had insurance. I just never paid attention to it. They can't fit me in. I just lied. 2 weeks later, I was. So I didn't go to rehab. The dean was not happy. 2 weeks later, I was living in a corner room, a second-story corner room, and there were two. I always do this. The corner. There were two windows. One window led to a sun deck, and we would crawl headfirst out that window to drink on the sun deck. The other window did not lead to a sun deck, and in a blackout, I crawled through the wrong window, and so I fell 2 stories down into a concrete window well. I fractured my skull. I did all kinds of other damage, some of which still affects me today. I still have parts of my face I can't feel. I still get double vision every single day. But in terms of what was expected to happen and what happened, I skated. I have been on borrowed time for a long time because I was not expected to survive. The description that the nurse who and ended up, of course, because of the way AA works, the emergency room nurse who was on duty that night when I came in, turned out to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she described it for me later that my head was swollen up like a watermelon when I came in, and I was screaming at her and cursing everyone. And actually, in the conversation before she knew it was me, she said, he was the single most obnoxious person I've ever met. At which point I said, hey, that was me, my last drunk. But that happened on June 26th of 1984. I guarantee you, no one in the world, myself included, expected that would be the last day I drank. And when I can remember that, it helps me when I'm trying to carry the message to people who are struggling. Because I think I'm looking at something, but maybe what I'm looking at is their June 26th. Maybe I'm looking at their June 22nd, and nobody expects it. And the question is, can I just stay and continue to carry the message in their struggles and not judge, not criticize, not condemn, not cut them off? Now that, if you're sort of looking at my skill sets, judge, criticize, condemn, cut off, I have a PhD in those. So, but Alcoholics Anonymous is really about something else. So I ended up, the dean, with the aid of someone else. So what happened in the background, which I didn't know at the time actually, was I went to the same college as Dr. Bob. So we have this like long history of alcohol abuse. And at the time that I went out the window, the college had just hired a new director of services for student drug and alcohol abuse. And this guy, the only thing I remember is his first name was Phil, this guy said, the next student who comes up on the wheel, we're going to make him or her go to AA and see what happens. And that was me. Had I bottomed out 6 months earlier, Phil wasn't there. So I don't know what would have happened. But what I know is right when I needed it, it was there. And I believe those opportunities are available to all of us. The question is, what do we do with them? So I started to go to AA just to get out of the trouble I was in. And so my guess is, and we're not taking a truth survey here, but my guess is sitting in this room tonight, there is at least one person who is like I was, which is, I didn't come here to quit drinking. I didn't even know you didn't drink in AA, actually. I came here just to get out of the trouble I was in. And when I got here, I had at least one more move. And I would stay here for a little while, I would get out of trouble, and then I would make my move. And I'd be back in the saddle. So you guys are talking about, permanent sobriety and turning my will and my life over to God and all that. And I'm thinking it's more like, God, hold my beer, let me get through this, and then I'll grab it later. And I came to my I didn't know, literally, I knew nothing about AA. And then the concept of, maybe it's just culturally not in the media as much, and I don't know, or maybe it was just me, but I'd never heard the phrase 12-step program or any of those things. And so I came to my very first meeting, and I knew who was going to be there. I knew it was going to look like a 1930s hobo movie, where everybody would have like the long coats and the shaggy beards and the bottle in the pocket, I got sober in Pittsburgh, so we have tons of bridges, so they would come from under a bridge. I hadn't worked out how they got to the church I was going to, but maybe there was a bus or something, but so I go in, of course I'm late to the meeting, and I'm following somebody, I think I'm going to the right room. I sit down, and instead of that group, I see people who look like you. And there's a woman talking, and she's talking about God. And I thought, in the wrong room, in like some kind of revival meeting. But there's no alcoholic who does not walk into a room already planning the exit. Because you need to make them quickly sometimes, and it happens. So I know when she finishes, I'm going to slide back out, and then I'm going to go find, the other room. And she finishes talking, and before I can move, the next woman, Helen, actually the woman I saw 5 years later was Helen, and she says, my name's Helen, and I'm an alcoholic. And I thought, oh my God, she could be my grandmother. And then she said, my sobriety date is November 4th of 1964. Sort of an odd thing to remember. The reason I remember it is because I was born in September of 1964. And I had never heard the phrase sobriety date before. It was like, not a phrase the guys I drank with used. What's your sobriety date? Tomorrow. But I knew when she said that, she meant she had not had a drink almost my entire life. And I thought, neither possible nor even desirable, to be totally honest. But then she started talking, and other people started talking. And what they were talking about was the stuff that was going on inside of me that I had never shared with anybody else. You know, the big book talks about the four horsemen, and all those kinds of things: terror, frustration, bewilderment, despair, consuming fear. I didn't have the word because I couldn't have put it. The other thing, it would have been consuming self-pity. But I didn't know. Locked in the bondage of self, stuff I didn't have words for. But what they were saying was that's where they had been, and now they were on the other side. And I didn't know there was another side. I thought it was some people get this, what I got, and some people get the other stuff. And it's just, chance or luck of the draw or whatever it is. But I didn't get that. And they were talking about being on the other side. And that caught my attention. And it's got to pay attention because I'm a talker here, so I don't want to be at my first meeting and it's like 9:25. But so people gave me great suggestions, and they were really helpful and welcoming to me. And they talked to me about how I should start to go to meetings regularly. But see, I was 19 when I got sober, so I'm younger than almost everybody in the room. In my head, I have the common alcoholic problem, which is I'm also slightly smarter and more insightful than everybody in the room. And despite my 0 level of experience of recovering from alcoholism, I hear what you're saying, but I know what I need. So if you're saying that, if you're new, by the way, I can maybe save you some grief. You don't know what you need. You have no idea. I had no idea. But the problem is, I thought I did. And who did I talk to? I talked to myself. Then I come up with an idea, I check with myself, I agree, and then I'm gone. So people are saying you should go to a meeting every day, get a sponsor, work the steps, transformative spiritual experience, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, I need a job, or better yet, a source of income, low effort, high reward. I need a relationship, low commitment, at least for me, middling drama, high joy. And then I'm good. And you guys can be humility, spirituality, great for you. I just need these two things and I'm going to be okay. When we think we're pointing at what we need, I need my spouse back. I need my kids to love me again. I need my boss to take me back. None of that's real. Those are consequences of things, but they're not the thing themselves. And that's what I couldn't see. So I didn't do the things that people suggested. I went to meetings when I could squeeze them in. I tried to pray a little bit, but it was kind of embarrassing. And I'm a guy who's literally passes out in his own vomit on lawns. And that's just part of the terrain. But if somebody walked in and saw me kneeling down praying, can you imagine what that would be? What would they think of me? I'd be like crazy. But so what happens to me is what happens to alcoholics who put down the drink and otherwise don't do it, who are able to put down the drink, and some aren't even able to do that. I got the fortune to be able to put it down, but I didn't feel better. I actually started to feel worse. All that stuff that's underlying, the restlessness, irritability, discontent, that's just flying through the roof. So I am, paralyzing depression, murderous rage. And I'm starting to see little bits of things, I'm starting to understand when people are talking about hitting bottom. I think that's all external, that people are sort of like, oh, I had my 12th DUI and my 6th divorce, and and I'm thinking that's bottom. Because I'm so ill, people are saying to me, oh, you're so fortunate to get sober young. And I'm thinking, where am I going to get my 6 wives? I'm like, that seems like I'm not going to get that now, because of getting, so I feel deprived getting sober young. That's how delusional I was. At the same time, I realized that I'd be talking to people who are trying to be kind to me and welcoming, and they're trying to connect with me because I'm so much younger than they are, and they're saying stuff like, oh, I have a daughter who's your age. I think they're trying to set me up with their daughter. I'm like a total, they don't even want to sit next to me at the meeting. I'm so crazy, but in my head, that's what's going on. We get to these places in Alcoholics Anonymous, where if you've done that, been able to put down the drink and do nothing else, our literature is filled with these descriptions of turning points and crossroads and jumping off places. And I got to that place where I was going to drink or do this, throw myself into this, or put a gun in my mouth. Because I could not stand walking around in my own skin anymore. I mean, the best way I could describe it is I just wanted to be able to peel off my skin and step outside of myself so I could stop being me for a while. And alcohol used to do that. And then it didn't. And it did the opposite. And it wouldn't stop. And the more I drank, the worse it got, and it still wouldn't turn off. And now it was that way sober. So I'm sitting in meetings and people are like, oh, I got sober 3 months ago and I used to be living under a bridge, now I'm president of IBM. Isn't Alcoholics Anonymous great? And I'm thinking like, oh my God, I would love to come over there and like rip your throat out. But I am far too depressed to get out of this chair. You know, that's sort of like, that's kind of my mood right now. So I go to a meeting one night and I think I'm going to do something that I haven't done, which is, you know, be honest. And I'm going to tell people, this isn't working for me. I don't feel good. Because when people say, how are you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm good, yeah. Let go, let God. One day at a time. And because we do that, because alcoholics, what one of our gifts is, or at least for me, I mean, I don't want to generalize, although a lot of my alcoholic friends have the same skill set, which is I walk into a room, I scan it. I figure out what people are doing, what they're thinking, what they're saying, what they're talking about. Click! I put on that mask, and I do that. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm like, click, oh yeah, ain't God great? And then I walk out, and now I'm running around with drug dealers because I don't want to let go of that life. And I have a different mask on. And I'm going to go to this meeting and tell the truth. And it's a beginner meeting. There are usually like 20 people there. So I go to the meeting. There's coffee set up, the cake, the cookies, the whole big deal. Like this. We didn't have cronuts though. So that's or crawnuts. Crawnuts. I was close. We didn't have cronuts or crawnuts. But I show up and not a single other person is there. Whoever made the coffee left. And I thought, you know, this is so typical of my life. Like I'm there and it gets snatched. So I'm ready to leave, and this guy Tom comes in. I don't really know this guy very well. And he says, where is everybody? And I remember thinking, how would I know? I mean, you're the member. Because I'm just, like in my head, I'm just passing through. I'm sober like 6-7 months at this point. But I have zero. I'm just a guy rolling through until I can make my next move. And he says, why don't we have a meeting ourselves? Which just sounds like a terrible idea. Because what I want to say is like, why don't you have a meeting yourself and I'll be back later for the speaker. But I don't, whatever would have taken to have that, I don't have it anymore. And we sit down and he says, so what's going on? And it all comes out. Like, I'm not getting this at all. I want to drink all the time. He's like, oh yeah, the one to drink. I remember that. I'm like, yeah, okay. I think about killing myself all the time. Oh, the killing yourself. I remember that. I'm like, I tried to jump out of a moving car the other day because I couldn't stand being in it anymore. I just couldn't, like I was going to explode. And I think about killing other people all the time. Like, I just want to be like attacking people. He's like, oh yeah, they're killing other people. I remember that. Like, and we go through this. Here's what it is. There's this wonderful AA pamphlet called A Member's Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you haven't read it, I would really strongly encourage you to. It's my very favorite AA pamphlet. But one of the things that gets described in there is this desire we have. He uses the phrase to stand naked before someone else, meaning stripped of all pretense. And what I was doing was that with him. I was trying to be as honest as I could, because the filter thing should go through is, you think it, is it true, you say it. It's a basic. I didn't have that part. I had I think it, what effect do I think this is going to have on what I think you will think about me? And that dictates what I say. Whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. This guy, it was trying to be true, as honest as I could. And he was a person who understood the illness, understood the solution. He knew what was wrong with him. He knew what the solution was. He had lived it out. He did what we, those of us who have taken the steps, are uniquely positioned to do, which is to participate in the creation of that space with God in which some of the most ill people in the world can recover. You know, he didn't have to stay there with me. He could have left. But he really was in some ways the door in which I walked into AA. Here's the funny thing about that. Well, funny is probably the wrong word, but I've been, I would say, at least a half dozen meetings since I've been sober since that time, where I've been the only person to show up with a new guy. Because of what he did, I knew what to do. I leave and tell them wait for the next meeting. No, I stay there with them in the same way he did with me. You know? And so I started to do stuff. I started to work more closely with a sponsor. I had a sponsor. I actually started working with him. We had, because I had this moment where the short version of it is I was as close to drinking as I've ever been since I got sober. I mean, I was right there. And I knew that if I picked up what was in front of me, I was not going to be able to stop. And people had told me that's what alcoholism is. Once you start, you can't stop. And I knew that was true. And I knew that because I couldn't stop, all of the stuff, bad stuff, was coming back again. But the second thing I knew was that sitting there, despite the first one, despite knowing I would not be able to stop and everything bad was coming back, left to my own devices, I was going to do this anyway. That's what it really means to be powerless over alcohol. And people had told me that that day would come, and the phrase that a guy in my first home group used to use is, there would come a day when no power on earth would keep you sober. Now, however one phrases that, nothing but a higher power is going to keep me sober. And I prayed, really, for the very first time. And it was as simple as, if you don't help me, I'm done. And the only way I can describe that experience is it was as though something physical happened. It was like something just got pulled up out of me. My first sponsor helped me to see how the first and second step, that's what I was starting to try to live in. Took the third step, we knelt down together, to say that the third step prayer. Haven't had the opportunity to do that. I can't encourage it enough. Done it with, I don't know how many people since then, lots. And every time to be present with someone who is trying to make that real connection with a power that is going to transform their lives. To be present, to be able to participate in that is an unbelievable gift. When I wrote my first inventory, did my first fifth step, started that lifelong process of 6 and 7, I'll be honest, I didn't, no matter what I was saying, what I was really living was not the prayer that says, remove these defects to the extent they stand in the way of my usefulness to you, Lord, and my fellows, but it was, please remove these defects to the extent they stand in the way of my usefulness to me. And that was really but you got to start somewhere. and you can only start where you are. And that's where I was able to start. Eventually, trying to live that way gets too painful. And it becomes clear that it really is that getting relief of everything that stands between God and me. And seeing this stuff about alcoholism, seeing that I could see that thing about how, whereas many non-alcoholics tend to change their behavior to meet their goals, alcoholics tend to change their goals to meet their behavior. And that defined my life. It defined my drinking life. Unchecked, that will define our sober lives as well. That's not a symptom of drinking, that's a symptom of alcoholism. A life that is consumed with fear will look the exact same way. And I will sit there and run this dialogue to the other half of me, monologue in my head about why it's not my fault. I could have been a contender, but for this, but for where I was born, but for bad luck here. I could have been a contender if I would just do the work to be relieved of fear. To be relieved of the bondage of self. And that's why I remember that phrase striking me as so odd in the third step prayer, bondage of self. Because I felt like I was giving up, getting to the front of the line, basically. And it wasn't. I was giving up being trapped in that radical alcoholic self-centeredness. And I would get free from it through the practice of these steps. I started to do that. I made my first set of amends. I've had universally good amends experiences. well, one exception, which is that I had to redo an amend. It was somebody I used to date, and I made the amend, and honestly, I'm not proud of this, but the message I think that came through in the amends was, hey, sorry for what happened, and why don't we have a post-amends party back at your place? That's not an amend, but that's what I shouldn't have made that amends the first time I made it. I had to go back and do it again. You think it's hard the first time? Sorry, I have to make amends for what I did and the amend I tried to make. But I got free from that. I went back to school. I threw myself into AA. I started, got really active in service, started sponsoring lots of people, started, was going to meetings regularly, but really trying to live this out. And having a completely different experience. It was like the sort of tale of two cities, my drunken time in college, my sober time in college. It was like I was a different person, because I was. I ended up moving after that to an area where AA was not up to snuff for my standards. They weren't doing it right. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, if you've said to yourself, I wonder how I can be the least popular person in Alcoholics Anonymous, here's the easy way. Move to a new area and say, bad news, you don't know what you're doing. Good news, I'm here. It says that people are surprisingly not very excited by that. But that's what I was able to do. And I, because my experience was, I was much more likely to hear somebody talking about their neighbor's cat than about it's yowling all night long, than to hear somebody talking about the transformative experience that Alcoholics Anonymous offers to alcoholics. That we can be reborn, have a completely different life, a miraculous life. But honestly, I weaponized the miracle. It's kind of like hitting somebody with the big book. Don't you see? No, they don't see. Because there's that great line that describes alcoholics, recovered alcoholics in the big book that says, someone whose whole deportment, meaning their presence, their being, shouts they're someone with an answer. That's very different than someone who shouts. Who's the actual it's your presence that shouts you have an answer, not your mouth. I was doing it with my mouth for a while. I had to learn how to do it with my presence. The gift that came out of that, after I reported back to my old sponsor about how everybody seemed to be getting a little better, and he told me that I now needed to listen to them, was I learned one of the ways in which alcoholic self-centeredness bound me was I was a terrible listener. That I thought there was talking and listening, and that I was listening when I wasn't talking. But actually what was happening was I was talking, then I was stopping to catch my breath and gather my thoughts for the next thing I was going to say, and then I started to say it. Now the problem was, sometimes the other person was talking and I couldn't figure out why, because it was my turn now. And I hadn't listened to them. I was incapable of it. We talk about God talking through other people. In order for that to be meaningful, I have to be able to hear it. And I can't hear it when my head can't shut up. And my head can't shut up if I'm bound itself. I had to learn how to pray to be able to do that, to become more, our big book talks over and over about becoming more effective at these things. That was one of the ways I became more effective. Finished graduate school, got some great experiences there, moved into the work world. I was the greatest employee ever in the history of North America until I started working full-time. Because alcoholism can leak out in all kinds of ways. And it's, different people have different things. It comes up for gambling for some people, or pornography, or spending, or whatever it is. For some people, like me, it comes out as work and money, which become a substitute for reliance on God. And I didn't see that at first. And the danger with things like that, at least for me, is if somebody calls me and says, hey, I spent 13 hours today surfing the internet, alternating between shopping, gambling, and porn sites while eating a dozen donuts, I'm going to say, hey, you're off. Same person says to me, hey, I'm working 70 hours a week, and I'm training for this marathon, and I've gotten really active in my church. I don't necessarily hear the same thing. But it is. It absolutely is. All those other things that look good on the surface, become destructive for us if we can't stay grounded in this. I had to learn how to practice these principles in the workplace, and I did it. By staying engaged, by doing it, it reshaped the way I work. Which turns out it reshapes now people are always telling me, because as I sort of over time moved up the chain, people are always telling me, you manage people completely differently than the way other people do. And to me, it just seems like what we do. Like I don't know how else to do it. And as somebody described at a meeting, someone says, a group I run of kind of very high energy, high ego people, a meeting was over and someone who had been visiting said, God, well, this is totally different than our group. And someone said, well, what's different? They said, well, pointed at me and said, well, he doesn't make everybody feel bad. That's a gift of AA. So 9th anniversary, shortly after my 9th anniversary, I got married. My wife and I will celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary this year. It's miraculous, it is. What I'm about to say is the low standard, and I know this is low, is in that time I have never cheated on my wife, I've never come close, I have never hit my wife, I have never come close. I would have done both drunk, and I would have done both dry. If I wasn't transformed, I would have absolutely done those things and worked out how it was her fault, and I didn't come close to that. I have 2 children. Just before my 12th anniversary, my son was born, and then 11 years later, my daughter came along. Every 11 years, whether we need one or not, and they have both been unbelievable gifts to me, and I have actually been a gift to them, and I could not have been. I could have been very, very different. Same thing. Never hit them. Never come close. Guarantee you, I would have done it drunk. Guarantee you I would have done it dry. I would have been unable to do anything else. The bondage of self, that's what it looks like for me. So I'm going along. I've been continuing. I'm not someone, a lot of people, I hear stories and they say, I drifted away from AA for a couple of years. I'm not that guy. I have stayed engaged the whole time. Since I got engaged. I was disengaged at the beginning. But once I got engaged, I've stayed engaged the whole time. Now, am I always perfectly on the beam? Of course not. But I've never drifted. And I don't think honestly, I just think the way my alcoholism looked, if I was a guy who drifted, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you. I'd be the cautionary tale of what happened to people who drift. But and I had everything's kicking along, continuing to grow. Things are popping up every so often. But the one thing that's out there, and I'd made amends, all of my amends, except one always felt unmade, even though I'd made the formal amend, and that was the amend to my father. Now, when I first got sober, people told me, you're going to have to make amends to your father. And I had what I would call the litany, which is I would talk about, I remember him, my dad was a violent guy. And he'd have my mother on the ground, and he'd be kicking her. And I was the oldest boy. And so it was my sense from really small that it was my job to get it in. And I remember trying, he worked in physical labor and would always have these heavy work boots on, and he'd be kicking her. And I'd be trying to hold him from youth. And the only thing I knew to do, he'd leave, she'd be unconscious. I'd be trying to cover her up and put Vaseline. I always remember that's the only thing I knew to do. And I thought, what do I have to make amends for? Here's what I had to make amends for. Because I kept praying and writing about it, and that great gift, what's called sometimes the sick person's prayer that shows up in the 4th step, about how we pray so that we can see people, because we know they are sick as we are, even if we don't like the way they suffer. God gave me 2 gifts around that. The first was, I could see that in the midst of all that violence and all that chaos, my father desperately wanted relationships with his children. And he wanted children who loved him and respected him. So every chance I got, I sent a message that said, I don't love you, I don't respect you, and when I get out of here, I am never coming back. That's the son I was. And the second gift God gave me was I could see that what we were witnessing was my father's suffering. Didn't like it, didn't make it okay, but that's what we were seeing. Because nobody does that to people they love, and my father loved us. Nobody does that to people they love unless they can't do something else. And the gift, how do I make amends for what I did? I'm praying about it. And my dad grew up in Ireland, very dirt poor, and there's an Irish game called Irish football. It sort of looks like soccer, but you can use your hands, a couple other differences. But the Super Bowl of Irish football is called the All Ireland. It's played every year in Dublin. And my father had always wanted to go and never had. And I'm praying about this, clear as a bell. A voice says, you have to take your father to the All Ireland. Now, the promise we ask for, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which you should baffle us, comes out of the 9th step. The 11th step promises the gift of intuitive thought. If I'm expecting that, and I get it, the only question is, do I have the honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to live it out or not? So because I'm imperfect, even though God had not mentioned my younger brother, I called my younger brother and I said, we have to take our father to the All Ireland. And he said, well, he said, I think tickets are tough to get in Ireland. They're impossible to get here. I said, I know, but we got to do it. So we were trying to run it down. Like 3 weeks later, my brother calls me and says, you're not going to believe this. He says, I know a guy who knows a guy who works for an ad agency in Dublin. He has 4 tickets to the game and he'll sell them to us. God gave me the tickets. God gave me the money. I had to bring everything else to doing it. We took our father to Ireland, went to the game. For the rest of his life, he talked about that as the greatest weekend of his life. And he talked to me about stuff that he'd never told anybody in his life before, that happened in his childhood. See, that's what we do when we do amends. I thought at first amends were only about us. It is about creating space with God for people to heal. Us and the other person. And do we bring that? Because of that, the freedom I got through that, I was freed in the way I parented my children. So I could be different to them than my father was to us. That he was bound in something that I got freed from. And, when my son in his late teens started to show signs of alcoholism, at first I did what everybody does. I tried to parent him out of it. That has exactly a 0% success rate since in all of recorded time. And then he starts to spiral. And I'm praying. And the message that comes back as clear as a bell says, your job is to do everything you can to make sure that if he needs to come through the door, there are people on the other side who have the answer just like you got when you got here. That's what your focus is. So I'm doing that, and he's spiraling. And then my prayer is changing a bit. And I'm saying, how could you do this? I've done everything you've asked, which is not true, but it sounded good at the time. I've done everything you asked. You couldn't spare him. And clear as a bell, an answer came back and said, who better to raise a child with alcoholism than somebody who has recovered from it? The gift in that, the great freedom that I got through that, was the ability to see him. Not the arrests, not the psych wards, not the accidents. To see my son I loved who was suffering from alcoholism. And because of that, I believe the gift that God gave us, when he bottomed out and he called me, said he needed help and he thought he needed to go to rehab, I could be there for him. And through the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous and what God's given him, he celebrated 6 years in this past November. It has been totally transformative for our relationship. We have such a great relationship. My daughter, non-alcoholic daughter, thank God so far at least, will be 16 next week. All she talks about is her imaginary car that she's getting, and I get to be there with her and really present through all of that stuff. And I would have missed all of that, drunk or dry. Now, I'm definitely on my time, so I'll finish here. Because it's always been this perfect little AA story for me. I remember years ago, this woman I knew was really struggling, and she went to an anniversary meeting. Actually, there were lots of families and food and the whole drill. But she has alcoholism, so she slipped off into a corner by herself and was crying. And this little girl came over to her and said, "Why are you crying?" And my friend said, basically, "It's grown-up stuff." And this little girl said, "You don't have to cry here." She said, "This is a good place. They took my daddy and they made him better.
And that's exactly what Alcoholics Anonymous did for me. It took me and it made me better. And that is a gift I believe that is available to anyone who is willing to accept it. So I thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for this.